Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to get into the second segment of the show, my tier list of the best teams that have just rocked this offseason. I like their additions. They're really improving, and some teams that have fallen short, haven't really lived up to my expectations more than anything. And the list I have here, I broke it up into four tiers that I measured the best teams, some teams better than others, and some down the list. The first tier, the best tier, is just the best offseason in my opinion. Really hit everything out of the park and are just crushing everything they do. The second tier is really good, but they're missing just one thing that's holding them back from being really, by having a really good offseason. The third tier is solid. They've improved, but there still remains questions on other parts of their organization, on their team, outside of just the players and their additions. And the last tier is the most disappointing teams in the NFL and teams that really just got worse and haven't done anything to counteract them getting worse by signing other players to counteract that. So those are the four tiers. I have a couple of teams in some of them and only one or two teams in other tiers. So in saying that, I'll start from the top. The best offseason, without a doubt, in my opinion, has been the Houston Texans. And they've had some losses this offseason. They've lost a few players. I know Steven Nelson is a free agent. Dalton Schultz was almost lost, but they were able to re-sign him. They lost Jonathan Grenard. They're one of their best pass rushers last year. And they lost Blake Cashman. But they've basically replaced mostly all of those with just as good of players or potentially even better players. And that's really what did it for me on how they just had so much success last year. D'Amico Ryans was a rock star as a new head coach. He came in and just blew the doors off of everything, and he was a great rookie head coach. He won the Rookie Head Coach of the Year award, not to mention C.J. Stroud as well. Probably up there with one of the best rookie seasons by a rookie quarterback. And just on that, the amount of now pressure, I guess you could say, that's on this team to live up to that in their second year because of how good the first year is. It's a lot louder when you don't perform in that second season or you drop off a little bit. Everything is amplified a lot more. And I think they've just set themselves up really well with the moves that they made. Like I mentioned, they lost Jonathan Grenard, but they added Danielle Hunter. They lost Devin Singletary, and they added Joe Mixon. So you could say they got better potentially at both of those spots. They lost Blake Cashman, but they brought in Azeez Al-Shaair from the Tennessee Titans. And they also brought in Danico Autry. And now they just need that last cornerback, defensive back. They don't really need it because Steven Nelson, I know, was good. He was one of their starting quarterbacks. But I think they could get away with, plugging in a cheaper option there. But if they wanted to get another player, bring in a really good player, there's still options out there. Xavier Howard has been linked to them a lot because he is from Texas. He said it on a podcast, I think. I think I saw him say it on the Udonis Haslam and Mike Miller podcast that he would love to play with the Houston Texans because of that connection that's there. And if he were to be added there, it just makes them that much of a better team and really leaving no cracks in this team where they could fall short in one of these positions. They're really improving this team, and I love how they've just not really settled, and they've gone out, gotten better players, tried to improve this team. Now that it almost catapults them into serious contention for the AFC, I'm really close to putting them up there with, honestly, like the Chiefs or the Ravens and the Bills, if you want to throw them in there. I'm really close to doing that, but they are so young, so that still lives in the back of your head. But overall, I love what the Houston Texans have done. Big fan of C.J. Stroud and seeing how young their team is and exciting is. So they got the best offseason grade for me. They stand in that tier all by themselves. And just below them, the really good tier, really impressive offseason, but they just missed on one thing or they're lacking in one department really. That would be the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Minnesota Vikings, and the New York Jets all fall into this category. Starting with the Steelers, they revamped that whole quarterback room, got rid of, Mitchell Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett, and they brought in two options that you could really argue are better than all three of those guys, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, recency bias shows that, he might not be as good at least 2 seasons ago, but last season he was sneakily very good. Definitely better than the numbers that any of the quarterbacks on the Steelers put up. So that's an improvement regardless. Justin Fields really is more comparable to those three guys that left, but he does show that potential, that just talent that sits there, and that Mike Tomlin has said he can't wait to try and really fulfill that potential. That's really what separates those two from the quarterbacks that they have had in there. I think you got the best and knew exactly who those three quarterbacks were. So that's an upgrade at the quarterback position on very little money as well, I might add. Just, I think, $3 or $4 million is what's their salary cap hit for these two quarterbacks. So, low risk, high reward potentially with one of these two guys. That's an awesome move. The Patrick Queen signing is an awesome move for them because they haven't had a player like him since Ryan Shazier, and it has made an impact in how that defense has looked. Patrick Queen is coming off of a Pro Bowl season with the Baltimore Ravens, and I think he's just as good as any linebacker to step in there and really lead this defense going into next year. They've added some wide receivers, Van Jefferson. They added Cordell Patterson today, actually, before I got on the show. They've added, Quez Watkins, and, those are solid, good depth at that position, as the Steelers always seem to do. But the but comes in now, and they still need that receiver to complement George Pickens legitimately, because they had that in Deontay Johnson, but they traded him away for Dante Jackson, which is a good get back in terms of trading your number one, number two receiver and getting a number one or number two corner back in Dante Jackson. That was a good trade, but they just need somebody else to elevate that position even more. But still, great offseason so far. I've mentioned I like how aggressive they've been. That gets a good grade from me. Moving on to the Chiefs, a bit less of quantity and more quality, because they held on to Chris Jones and Drew Tranquil, their linebacker that showed out last year. So those two were the two biggest needs that they needed on defense, really most of all. On offense, they had mostly everybody coming back. They had some gems in Rashee Rice that showed out as well. So they were pretty set there. Their only major caveat in why I have them ranked here is because they lost L'Jarius Sneed. Obviously, that's going to hurt. That's going to put a dent in how great your offseason is. It would have been flawless if they kept Jones and Sneed and Tranquil, but they traded L'Jarius Sneed to the Tennessee Titans. So that cornerback position is looking a little bit suspect, but like I mentioned yesterday, I think the Chiefs are at their best when their offense is really good, humming on all cylinders, just unstoppable, and their defense only has to be decent and make stops once in a while, because Patrick Mahomes, if he has a great offense, more often than not, he's going to outscore the other team. So the Chiefs, solid offseason, got back crucial pieces, but they lost L'Jarius Sneed. The Vikings as well, I liked what they added on defense in Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, Blake Cashman, Aaron Jones as well, to an offense that already includes Justin Jefferson. Jordan Addison's really great. TJ Hawkinson is probably top 2 or top 3 best tight ends in the game. They have a lot of great pieces. They just obviously lost Kirk Cousins, so they need that quarterback, and that's really the only thing that really made me put them in this category. They lost Kirk Cousins, so they need the quarterback, how important it is. And it's an uncertainty right now if they're going to be able to trade up for one. They have 2 first-round picks, but that's going to be huge in determining, how great this offseason really was. I love what they have on offense, like I mentioned. Defensively, they got better by adding those pieces, and they have a real chance of competing in this division with the Bears that are on the come up. The Lions, you could say, are the best team, but they definitely didn't seem unstoppable with how that second half went in the NFC Championship. And then you have the Packers as well, who went toe-to-toe with the 49ers and had great games with the Lions, beat them on one occasion on Thanksgiving. So if the Vikings can just get a quarterback, I don't think they're very far off, if at all, from those other teams. And that division should be exciting going forward. But that's where I have the Vikings. And lastly, the Jets. They addressed their biggest needs. Really all of them in this offseason. O-line, wide receiver. And those two were the biggest needs. Adding Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, John Simpson, two former Ravens, and Tyron Smith from the Cowboys. Their O-line is really revamped and looks brand new, much improved. Got Mike Williams to complement Garrett Wilson. They added Javon Kinlaw from the 49ers, which I think is good on their defensive line. But they still need a safety because they lost Jordan Whitehead. He had an awesome season for them last year, but I'm almost certain he returned to the Buccaneers. So that's going to be a need. Another cornerback to complement Sauce Gardner after losing Bryce Hall. But they've addressed most of their needs that held them back last year, so the Jets get a really good grade from me. Moving on to the next tier, improving, having a solid offseason, but there's still questions elsewhere. The Tennessee Titans, the Washington Commanders, the Atlanta Falcons, the Eagles, and the Chicago Bears. The Titans added Ridley, Cushenberry, Chidobe Awuzie, Tony Pollard, Kenneth Murray, and they traded for L'Jarius Sneed. They've definitely improved, but the question is how Will Levis is going to look, how Brian Callahan is going to look with this new team, handling his own team in a division where the Texans are really the alpha in that division. The Jaguars are nothing to sneeze at as well, and the Colts will give you a good game here or there, so they still have questions, but they're definitely improving. The same could be said for the Commanders. They added a lot of pieces, but they still obviously need that quarterback, which everyone expects them to address. But Dan Quinn, how's he going to look going back to head coaching? Offensive coordinator in Cliff Kingsbury, does that suit him better than head coaching? Because as a head coach, he left a bad taste in everyone's mouths at Arizona. So, those questions are still there. But they definitely improved with Eckler and Biadish coming in as well. The Falcons are also in this tier. Huge upgrade at quarterback with Kirk Cousins to all those weapons. Bijan, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. It's just that defense, man. It's like they have no pass rush. They have good players in Jesse Bates and A.J. Terrell, but they really have no pass rushers. Bud Dupree and Calais Campbell are free agents. So, they have to address that. They definitely improved somewhat. Their team is better, but it's glaring on defense. So that's why they're not in the really good tier. They're in the solid, improving, but they still need a few things to get over. And like I mentioned, the Eagles, good offensive improvements. Saquon being added to the group is the biggest one, obviously. Defensively, they added Devin White, Bryce Huff, and Paris Campbell, as well as Devontae Parker to their receivers. But they were so bad on defense last year. You have to see how the offensive coordinators and the new defensive coordinators fit, because that was such a big problem last year. Those are still uncertainties, but the amount of talent that they have makes them make this part of the list. Very good. They've definitely improved from the players they had, especially on defense last year, but I would love to also see them add another corner, because I wasn't the biggest fan of Bradbury last year, so they could still have some area to improve there. And the Bears, just as well as all the other teams. Keenan Allen coming in as well. Adding Gerald Everett to this team. DeAndre Swift. It all looks great, but there's still questions around Matt Eberflus, the offensive line, defensive back, middle linebacker. Those are areas that are still glaring, and this is a long-term project as well, but the improvements, the immediate improvements are there. I like what they've done, so they've made this part of the list. And just to round it out, this last part of the segment, the worst off seasons in my opinion, and the ones that just got worse, quite frankly, which are the Bills, the Ravens, and the Giants, and the Cowboys. Like I mentioned a little bit before with the Bills, they lost so many players that it really will make an impact because those guys were locker room guys, were leaders. So that's going to play a bigger role than I think a lot of people will take account into. And you just don't really know what you have on offense right now. Outside of Stephon Diggs, where can you look to? Dalton Kincaid is going to his second year. I get that, but they had so much firepower that now losing it, it's going to look weird. And they've just gone worse because they've lost more players than they've brought in. The Ravens, they've lost a lot of players. They lost Patrick Queen, Geno Stone, John Simpson, Morgan Moses, Ronald Darby, Gus Edwards, Zeitler, Tyler Huntley, and they brought in Josh Jones at the offensive tackle, which was good. Obviously, they brought in Derrick Henry, which has made all the headlines, but those are all starters that they lost and really good players that are now on other teams. And you could refill them through the draft, I guess, but I think those are going to come back to bite them a little bit, and they haven't added players, which is the biggest theme of it all, to try and replenish what they've lost with those guys. The Giants, same thing. Saquon, I talked about it. Not paying him or McKinney really annoyed me. But they added John Runyon from the Packers, and Devin Singletary to kind of soften the blow. But regardless, they've gotten significantly worse. Questions around the quarterback. They are just somehow worse than they were last year. Sorry to say, but it is the reality of it. And the Cowboys, I won't get too much into it. They talk about being all in, but they've only added Eric Hendricks, and they've lost too many players to name right now. So everyone knows where the Cowboys stand. It doesn't look like they're going to add people now because of salary cap restrictions. And that's where they stand. That's the end of my tier list and how I have these teams ranked. I would love to know your guys' feedback on them, what you guys think of these tiers. Do you think someone should be higher? Did I miss out on a team that should be included? Leave it in the comments or let me know in the chat box as well. But that'll do it for that segment on my tier list of the best off seasons. I'm going to send it to the second break, and on the other side, I'm going to talk about all the news, all the quotes that have been coming out recently from the NFL coaches meeting that's been going on over these last few days. So don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss that, plus much more, all coming up next.